Welcome to another episode of Otherworldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. Brian, we got a good one today.
We do have a good one. I'm excited for today.
I'm extremely excited.
I'm excited every week, but today has me extra excited.
Yeah, I mean, we got a special guest on.
We do.
His name is Doug Waller.
Yep.
And you want to give a little bit of his background?
Well, we'll let him give the background.
All right, that works.
Yeah, but I'm excited. This is a topic that's just so prevalent in the paranormal field and really the cryptozoology field. I mean, this is kind of the head of Mount Rushmore, so to speak. And it's just exciting for me to have somebody that's spent so much time, and dedicated a big part of their life to kind of researching the truth. So I'm just excited to talk to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Did we mention what we're talking about, though?
No, we didn't. You want to key it in?
I do. My shirt.
Oh, yeah.
Bigfoot, baby.
Excellent.
We're diving into Bigfoot. I love it. But before we do that, what are we drinking?
Yeah, so you brought these over today, Mike. We've got Sweet Baby Jesus Chocolate Peanut Butter Porter.
Yeah, by Claw Brewing.
Cheers.
Awesome. I hope I was able to open mine.
There we go. All right. Well, Doug, thank you so much for being with us. Do you just want to give kind of a little background on who you are?
Sure. First, I'd like to mention that while you guys are drinking your spirits there, I'm drinking Clover Valley purified drinking water.
Love it.
So,
All right.
I started out as a child, or no, wait, that was Bill Cosby that started that. I don't want to go there. I got hired by the library in Guernsey County, Ohio, down in Cambridge. And immediately upon arrival, I started walking through the stacks of books and discovered they had a handful of Bigfoot books. And I thought, boy, this is going to be great working here because there's stuff on the shelf that I really enjoy. So I started reading those books. Now, this would have been, I'm going to say about 2005, 2004, something like that. Started reading these Bigfoot books, and one of the gals at the desk said, well, we can get others. I said, no. He says, yeah, you can go online, and we can order other Bigfoot books from other libraries through the interlibrary loan system. I thought, well, that's cool. So my availability of a handful of books suddenly blossomed into dozens, if not hundreds of books, from other libraries, because there were like 100 and some other libraries, city libraries and county libraries we traded with. So I really got interested in the subject, and I mentioned something one day to one of my coworkers, and I said, I brought these books in out of the book drop and put them up on the desk to be checked back in, and there was a book, I forget what the actual title was, but it was something about cryptozoology. And I was asking her name's Shauna, I said, that's a pretty cool book. Have you ever read anything about that? And she said, well, what is that word? I said, it's cryptozoology. It's the study of hidden animals. And she says, what do you mean hidden? Like they're afraid of you and they're hiding? I says, well, they're elusive, shy, and very difficult to see, such as Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, and I named off 3 or 4 of them. And she said, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. I'm into that stuff myself. I watch that kind of stuff on TV. So we continued to, talk about it at work and share notes. And we started going out on the weekends and investigating ourselves, at some of these places. Well, what really got us going was there was a married couple there in Guernsey County that had a sighting out at Salt Fork in a picnic area. And this would have been about, I believe it was 2004. And we knew these people, so we contacted them and talked with them and got the lowdown on their sighting. And they agreed to meet us out at the park and show us exactly where it took place and give us all the details. So we, anxiously waited for the weekend and met them out there and went and looked where they saw the creature. And, we were hooked. We started going out every weekend, either to Salt Fork or sometimes to Coshocton County because there had been quite a bit of reports out of that area as well. And it just grew. We started finding other people that were interested in it. And I had a few meetings on my screen porch at home. And then by, I believe it was 2006, or no, it was 2000 and I think 8 in February, we held our first official meeting at one of the library branches, and we had something like 25 people come. And I think there were 2 different couples that attended that had a sighting and never really reported it. They possibly weren't aware of the BFRO, and there weren't that many groups out there. There were some researchers, but most of them were working independently, by themselves, and they didn't have meetings or anything like that. But anyway, these 2 couples gave us the information, and we did the same thing with them. We met them out at the park and took down all the information and got pictures of where the sighting took place, and just kept doing that, and it kept growing and growing. And there have actually been maybe 2 or 3 meetings where we've had around 100 people show up.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And a lot of them are definitely interested in Bigfoot, and a number of them have had sightings. Some of them are researchers. Other ones are just very curious about the subject. And then we even get a few skeptics now and then. Oftentimes you'll have a married couple come, and one of them is a firm believer, and the other one just shakes their head, and they say, "I'm along for the ride." He promised me a dinner out at a restaurant if I'd go to this meeting with him.
That sounds right.
So Doug, for the skeptics that do show up, do any of them eventually change their mind?
Well, I would think that they probably would, because I haven't done this, but some of the other researchers, when one of the skeptics starts razzing them and saying, "Oh, you guys are probably drunk before you get out of the car," and this and that, and they usually end up inviting the skeptic to go with them. Said, "Well, if you're so sure that these things that we talk about don't exist, then you meet us at 10 o'clock at the gas station, and we'll go out to the park, and plan on staying all night, because we're gonna go out and sit, and we're gonna do some hiking and see what we can come up with." And I don't know that anybody doing that I know has had an actual sighting, but a lot of them have definitely heard stuff. They've gotten rocks thrown at them, and they've had trees pushed over and heard howls and whoops. And they're either on the fence or they've changed their mind and say, "Yeah, I think there is something out there too." But that's the way we handle that. And when I make my calls to people that have had reports, had sightings and stuff, whenever we do a talk at a library or at a conference or something, I always invite the participants, the audience. I said, if you had anything happen and you'd like to talk about it, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll let you stand up, and I'll be quiet for a few minutes, and you can tell what happened. And usually the person is kind of intimidated talking in front of a group. So I've got these little forms that I have setting out for people, and you just write your name and your telephone number on there, and I'll call you at a later date, and we'll talk about the incident that took place, and you can tell me everything about it, and I'll ask you some questions. And I typically record the conversation, and then I tell them that I'm in the process of writing another book, and I may want to use your story, and if I do, would you want your name used or not? It's up to them. It makes no difference to me if they want to remain anonymous. And a lot of these people, I'd say easily 50%, when they talk to me and tell me about their sighting or whatever it was that happened, they tell me that they themselves were definitely skeptics up until the time that they had the sighting. And, you know, a lot of people, it really shakes them up when they see something that they always thought was a fallacy, and it was somebody's overeager imagination.
I want to circle back to two things real quick, Doug. One is good for you. Mike and I spend a lot of time talking about UFO stories, and from what we've seen, it seems like probably 90% of them can be demystified in some manner or another. But what we find really interesting is that it's hard to get people who may have credible backgrounds to come forward, you know, due to fear of being ostracized. So it's right. Interesting. You know, I like your approach of here's a sheet, you can fill it out. If you want to come forward, great. And if not, you know, no harm, no foul. So I think that's really cool. So good for you on that. And the other thing I wanted to circle back to for our listeners that aren't really familiar with Bigfoot, you stated the acronym BFRO, and I know what that stands for, but could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. That was created by Matt Moneymaker. I believe the year was 1995. And I've got 3 or 4 friends that are BFRO researchers, you know, and they conduct these campouts themselves. There's a couple of them in Ohio, and I think there's one in West Virginia, and maybe one in Kentucky. And we use their database a lot, you know, for when we give our library talks. We talk to, you know, the people in the audience, and we show them how to access the BFRO website and how they can select a particular state they're interested in, and then click on that state, and then it brings up all the counties. Mm-hmm. And I found out from one of my friends who is a BFRO researcher, the database that's available to the public is much, much smaller than the reports that they've actually received. They have another list of incidents that is only available to those researchers. In other words, the public, you know, can't access it. And this one friend of mine, when I'm getting ready to talk at a library in a particular area, I'll try to call him up beforehand and ask him if there have been any, any reports from that county or that area, because I'm going to be doing this talk. And he looks it up in this private database, and I believe he calls it the flats, and it's only accessible to the BFRO researchers. But he'll look on there and say, yeah, there's 2 of them, and he'll tell me what they were. And if it's something really interesting, I will write this down and I'll talk about it.
So, now, Doug, not to cut you off, but is there a specific reason why they keep like the flats separate, or keep that information from the public to being able to look that up?
Well, what I'm told is it's like a rough draft, the initial report from the eyewitness. Mm-hmm. And they don't really certify it and put it in the official database until it's been researched by one of their researchers.
That's fair.
And
that makes sense.
And I'm told that, like Ohio, for instance, they use Interstate 70, you know, east to west, the dividing line as far as the northern region and the southern region. And I was told that there are far more researchers in the northern region, in other words, north of I-70 than south of I-70. Now, the actual numbers of reports coming in may vary. You know, it could be that most of them are from the southern area, and they're waiting. These researchers haven't gotten around to all of them. Some of them, they may never get around to them.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting. The BFRO is a really cool website to go and check out. If you're not familiar with Bigfoot, it's kind of a neat entrance into it. But one of the things that I think is fascinating is the number of sightings documented per state. And when I think of Bigfoot, I typically think of Washington, Oregon, California, West Coast, but our good old Ohio, last I checked, is like number 5 for number of sightings, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting is my coworker and I we were talking, this is before, we decided we were going to, or we started talking about this episode, and we just got on there because he started talking about Bigfoot. And he's like, well, how many Bigfoot sightings have been in Ohio? It can't be that many. And we actually, by chance, pulled that website up, and it's very informative to your point. And I was kind of taken back by the amount of sightings.
Yeah. So, Doug, I want to ask you, because I mean, you've spent so much time and talked to so many people. I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask, like, how do you approach kind of gathering these eyewitness testimonies, and what are you looking for and kind of helping you determine whether a witness is credible or not?
Well, if it's an in-person interview, you can look at them, and read their body language. I've had some people tell me what happened, and the hair stood up on their arms, and they got goosebumps, and their eyes kind of tear up. And same thing over the phone. I had one guy was just bawling his eyes out over the phone when he was telling me what happened. And it was just like a release to him because he had it bottled up inside. And he actually moved away. His particular incident took place down in, I think it was Jackson County, Ohio. And he was fishing with his girlfriend at the Hammertown Lake. And I think that's the city's drinking water for Jackson. And you can put a boat on it, but you can't use an outboard motor. It has to be a rowed or an electric motor. He was fishing off the bank back in the back part of the lake. There's like a gravel road you can drive down, and you can back a trailer in if you have a boat and fish. But he and his girlfriend were bank fishing at night for catfish, and he said that they had lawn chairs and a table and a grill, and they had some catfish that he'd caught on the grill cooking, and he had his fishing rods and his tackle box and a lantern and all kinds of stuff setting out on the ground. And one of these boogers let out a scream, and the sound went across the water, and he said it just shook his whole body, and then it ended in a growl. And it scared him so bad, he dropped his fishing rod and ran to his girlfriend, who was 10 feet away, also fishing. He got her in front of him and pushed her toward their pickup truck. They got in and got out of there and went home. So
they just left all their gear there, like just
right. They left everything there, and I said, "Wow." And he said, "I just couldn't handle it. I felt my back of my neck, the hair going up, and shivers on." And so we left. And I said, "Well, was your stuff still there when you went back the next day?" And he says, "I don't know." I says, "You don't know?" He says, "No, I didn't go back the next day." I said, "Oh, did you wait a couple days?" He said, "I've never been back."
Oh, boy.
He left everything there, never went back. He moved from out in the sticks, somewhere around Jackson County. He moved to somewhere in Lancaster, where there are houses and concrete and streets and cars and lights and people around. He was so terrified by what happened.
Well, I can contest, I grew up in a city, but I had family that lived out in the country, and we spent a lot of times in the woods. And I can contest that in the woods at night is a whole different experience because, for one, you can only see so far, but just the sounds that you hear can be just, chilling because you just don't know what they are. So,
Doug, in your opinion, and this is one of the things that I wanted to ask because I'm just curious based on the stories that you've kind of heard and pulled in. Do you find that these creatures are more aggressive, or are they more kind of passive and calm?
Well, I haven't really had any aggressive stories. Sometimes people will misinterpret intimidation as aggression.
Okay.
Because you get a lot of stories about people getting rocks or sticks or pine cones or acorns thrown at them. And that's not really aggression. That's just, Bigfoot has a whole bag full of tricks that he can use to get you to leave an area if he wants you out of there. He can throw rocks and sticks. He can scream. He can shake a tree. He can push a tree clear over. It's my opinion that some people, report the horrible odor. I think Bigfoot is able to produce that odor at will, just like a skunk does. It's because some witnesses are 5 feet away and they say, I never smelled anything, not a thing. And other people tell me that they were in bed in the house with the windows and doors closed, and it stunk so bad they put their head under the pillow and they could still smell it outside.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
pretty wild.
That is pretty wild.
So you got to differentiate between what is actually aggression and what is just his way of intimidating to get you to, you to try to get you to leave.
That's fair. Almost like a territorial behavior.
Yeah. So, Doug, do you think that though, when a Bigfoot is, throwing things or whatever, I mean, is there a chance that it's not necessarily an intimidation thing, as it is just like an attention thing? Like maybe he wants to be seen, and there's just trying to it's just like an attention gathering type thing?
Oh, I think if he wants to be seen, instead of probably throwing something, he would just step out from behind the tree
That's
or
fair.
rock or whatever and let you see him. Now, we also get a lot of reports of them looking in windows. They're fascinated with children and very curious about women. Men, not so much. And, I think I agree with some of the other researchers. They say, well, oftentimes when Bigfoot encounters a man, he's hunting. He's got a 30-06 or a 12 gauge or something with him, and they're very intelligent and they know what those firearms are. But I've taken quite a few stories about children where the creatures, look in the window, or while the kids are at the school grounds outside at recess, and there's a Bigfoot 100 yards away at the tree line watching them. They're just curious.
But there's never been any reports of any like children going missing and, Bigfoot supposedly being the culprit, right?
Well, have you read any of David Paulides' 411 books?
I have not.
No.
Okay, well, not to go in too long with David, but he was a ex law enforcement officer, and he did 2 Bigfoot books before he did the 411 books. And in some of these missing 411 books, where the child was actually found later, maybe 3 or 4 days later, and the kid was okay, was not suffering frostbite or any scratches or deep cuts or anything like that. And, some of these kids are very young, 3 or 4 years old. And they'll say, well, we've been worried sick about you. Where were you? And the kid will look up and he'll say, I was in a cave. How did you get in a cave? He says, a bear picked me up and carried me and put me in a cave. Now, I don't see how a bear could do that. I've seen pictures of a bear's feet, and they don't really have fingers or an opposable thumb where they could bend over and grab a child and pick it up, and walk that far on their back, on their hind legs. So I'm thinking, well, is it possible that a Bigfoot did this, and the kid, not knowing about Bigfoot, he just says it was a bear?
Right, mistaken identity. Doug, yeah. I'm curious. I can't imagine how many stories you've collected over the years, but I just want to know, like, what is the most compelling evidence that you've either personally collected or kind of been affiliated with that really drives your belief in this?
Well, like I said, watching the reaction and listening to the reaction of some of these people as they tell me what happened. Seeing the body language where they'll shake and they'll break out into a sweat, or they get their hair stands up. One of the things that let me stop a second and tell you that I personally have not yet maybe seen a Bigfoot. I may never see one, and I'm okay with that if that happens that way. But I have found evidence, tracks and hair and broken trees. I've heard howls and yells. I've smelled that stinky smell. It smelled like rotten eggs, and then 30 minutes later, when we came back through the same area, that smell was completely gone. So, but I have not seen one. But one thing that really got me to thinking was when, it was before the DNA craze, my early years of doing this, when I read about people that would supposedly have Bigfoot on their property, and they would see these things, and they would come up with a handful of hair that was snagged on the fence. And the property owner said, "This came from that creature, so that's proof." And so they would take that hair sample, and maybe they would send it to Columbus, to Ohio State University or someplace, and they would study that hair, and they would try to compare it against what they had in their database, all their samples of hair. And when they would complete the test, the witness would say, "Okay, what did I see jump over the fence and get snagged and lose his hair?" And they would say, "Well, we can't tell you what it's from, but we can tell you what it is not from." And it's not from, and they'd go from aardvark to zebra, and they'd cover every known mammal, and it didn't match any of them. So that tells you there's something out there that we have not discovered officially yet.
So Doug, if this hair is sent to Ohio State to be tested and as samples, obviously they've been collecting hair for numerous years at this point. Are they able to compare the hair? Say if Brian and I were to go out right now and we thought we saw Bigfoot, found a clump of hair, would they be able to compare that to the other suspected Bigfoots that?
Well, I don't know that they still do it, or if there's a charge involved. The last I've recommended to a handful of people that contacted me that had hair, and I can't remember the lady's name, but there's a Bigfoot researcher, and I think she lives out on the West Coast somewhere, maybe Oregon or Washington, and I can't remember her name, but I've contacted her a couple of times and asked her if she is still doing this study. The people would send the hair to her, and she would study it and then get back with them on what she felt that it was. And I don't think she charged anything. And there again, I apologize because I can't remember what her name was.
No, you're good. Mike, that is an interesting question, though. If you have unknown hair in a DNA database and it's, alleged to be from a Bigfoot, I wonder if that database, if anyone's went through the database to compare all of the unknowns over time to see if they're linked. That is an interesting question. That might be worth looking into more at some point in time. Doug, I just for you, I remember the first time I was exposed to Bigfoot. I remember it actually very vividly. I was a kid and I was sitting in the living room with my mom and we were watching, I don't know, Discovery or, National Geographic or something. And they showed the Patterson film. And I remember watching that film and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Yeah. I can't believe that this thing is out there. And, you've talked about footprints, you talk about hair. The thing to me, I'm a science background, so show me the proof. It's like we talk about with aliens. Give me the craft, give me the bean, and then we'll just put this whole thing to rest, right? Mm-hmm. But like with Bigfoot, we have the prints, we have the hair, but why do we not have bodies or bones? That always just eludes me, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
I get that question quite a bit when we do our talks, at libraries and conferences and stuff. And I feel that a lot of it has to do with the government suppressing information. They're supposedly have been, I can't give you a number, but so I'll just say numerous. The numerous could be 2 or 3 to 102 or 3. But there have been Bigfoot dead bodies that have been found or recovered, and the government comes in and takes it away and tells everybody you're not to talk about this or else. And that's that.
Yeah.
And I even have a story in one of my books about a body that was seen by an eyewitness along Interstate 70 between Cambridge and Old Washington, and he was driving on his way to work, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, and he was on his cell phone talking to his wife because they worked different shifts and didn't really get to see one another that much, so they had to, talk on the phone whenever they could, just because they didn't, have each other's company that much. So he's driving east towards Cambridge, talking on his phone, and he comes upon this hulk on the side of the road that was mostly on the berm, but part of it was in the right-hand lane. He said the traffic, even though it was a ungodly hour of 3:30 a.m., the traffic was heavy. And he slowed down. He said, I definitely saw it was shaped like a person, but it was absolutely huge. It had hair on it. He saw a hand with fingers. He saw the foot. He saw everything on this thing except the head. He said the reason he didn't see the head, it was laying flat on its back with its feet pointing out towards his lane that he was driving in. And he said the chest was so big and broad that it was obscuring the vision, that he had toward where the head would have been. Mm-hmm. And he was telling his wife, he says, you're not going to believe this, but he said there was a Bigfoot laying alongside the road that had been, I suppose, hit by a semi or something. There was no car around. And the thing, there was blood and tissue and everything splattered along. So he told his wife, he said, as soon as I get off work, I'm coming back out here and I'm going to take pictures and measurements and all this. He comes back 8 hours later or whatever his shift was, and he didn't even go on down to the Old Washington exit. He cut through the place on the interstate in the median where the cop sits, to catch speeders.
Yeah.
He cut through there and went back and pulled over, and it was gone. He said it had been absolutely sanitized. There was not a hair, not a drop of blood, nothing there. Somebody had cleaned it up. He called it sanitized. And I've heard stories like that before, but I had never firsthand encountered the witness that saw it and got his reaction and, what he told me. Well, about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm reading this book, Bigfoot in Maine, by, I can't remember her first name, but her last name is Soulier. And there's a story in there that's almost identical, only it's people on a bus. And they pass this carcass along the side of the road, and there's 3 or 4 SUVs parked there. And these men, all wearing like similar suits, dark suits, and they got great big lights trained on this carcass laying, next to the highway. And they're looking out the window, and that looks like a Bigfoot. Well, the bus kept going, went down the road to the next town, dropped off the riders there, and then turned around, comes right back. It's like 30, 40 minutes later. Same thing. It was all gone, nothing there when the bus came back.
Huh, that's fascinating. And Brian, in all these episodes that we've done, we've never discovered the government suppressing any type of information.
Right. Common theme there. We hear that a lot in the UFO community.
Oh, absolutely. Wow.
Well, have you heard about, when Mount St. Helens blew, there supposedly was Bigfoot, casualties in that. And if they had found any when it was over with, nobody was told about it. They had those too.
Interesting.
Yeah, I never heard about any of those.
Doug, what do you think? What is it about Bigfoot, just from kind of like a cultural piece for society? Why is Bigfoot still so relevant? Whether it's a Jack Link's commercial, or now we see Bigfoot playing saxophone, or you see Bigfoot stickers on people's cars. Like, what is it about that just captivates so many people's attention?
Well, I think a lot of these little towns are capitalizing, on a chance to make some money. It's like the Mothman Festival
Right.
down in Point Pleasant. They get thousands and thousands and thousands of people to that, and it's spilled over into Bigfoot, Yeti, and ghosts and paranormal stuff, and everyone wants to get together and buy a new T-shirt, maybe buy another book, and meet new people and take pictures and videos. And I can't blame the town, for wanting to promote their own private animal or creature, whether it be Bigfoot or the Mothman or one of the many other ones. And there's a lot of them popping up. Logan, Ohio has a Hocking Hills Bigfoot Festival, and it's 3 or 4 years old now. I spoke there the first 2 years, and it's really grown. And there's a huge one down in Braxton County, West Virginia. They have a museum down there. My books are available down there too as well, and they get thousands of people. So it's just very popular right now.
Yeah. What do you think, from a historical perspective, like what, like Mike, you and I have talked a lot with some of the other guests we've had on how kind of folklore and mythology play into what we perceive as a modern day cryptid that's out there. And I'm curious to get your take, Doug. Like, how do you think, historically folklore has kind of helped shape this Bigfoot narrative? Because I'm sure it wasn't always referred to as Bigfoot.
No, I have a book, the historical Bigfoot, and let me check the guy's name, because I don't want to give you the wrong name here. It's by Chad Armett, and he's from Ohio, and this book is like 1,100 pages, and it's got old newspaper reports dating back, some of them well over 100 years. And see, they didn't have the terminology Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Sasquatch, the name came to be in the 1930s when a Dr. Burns, who was a teacher at I think it was the Chelis Indian Reservation out in Pacific Northwest, and they told Dr. Burns about these creatures up in the mountains, and they told him what they called this creature, and it was something similar to Sasquatch, but that was the term that he wrote down, Sasquatch. So that word came around in the 1930s. Now, the 1950s, 1958, I believe it was to be exact, Jerry Cruz out in Northern California was one of the equipment operators. I think he drove a bulldozer, and they were building roads up into the mountains to access the timber that they were going to have cut down. And these men, when they would work their shift and their shift was over, they'd shut off the equipment and just leave everything parked right there. And then they would go back to, I don't think they went home. I think they had the men stay in like barracks or something, back in town. They'd come back the next morning, and in the newly made roads, dirt roads, they'd find these great big humongous tracks, barefoot tracks that looked human, only they were 16, 17, 18 inches, whatever length they were, and very wide. So Jerry Cruz took pictures and made a plaster cast of one of these tracks and went into town to the Humboldt Times newspaper office and showed these pictures, and the wire service got a hold of the story, and it went nationwide, and there were people coming from all over the North America to look for these things. And the workers up there, I guess some of the men believed, this was some kind of a giant monster, and they were afraid, and some of them quit their job. They weren't going to work, and other ones laughed about it, and they said, oh, it was some hoaxer. But they called the maker of these tracks Bigfoot. And over the years, that Bigfoot got squeezed into one word, Bigfoot. So
That makes
up
sense.
until the 1930s, anyway, when one of these monsters were seen, they didn't have either one of those words to use to describe this thing. So it was wild man, it was Yahoo, it was several different old-fashioned names. And this book that Chad Arment wrote, like I said, it's fascinating because you can open it up, like I opened it up to Ohio, and there's several pages of stories in there. And I found one from the 1930s about, I think there were 5 or 6 men riding in a pickup truck, and they had a sighting of one of these creatures out on High Hill Road. And I used to live on High Hill Road back in the mid-'80s. And it frightened the men, and they went back to town and told everybody, and the story made the paper, the Daily Jeffersonian newspaper, and that transcript is in that book. Well, then a couple of days later, it was seen again about 4 miles south of there down in Byesville, and that story is in the paper too, and it's in that book. Well, a few days after that, it was seen in Muskingum County, which is west of Guernsey County, on the Hardesty farm, and the Times Recorder in Zanesville covered that story. And it's fascinating. You can follow these things, when you start reading them. But they didn't have it. They didn't have the name Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and so they had to come up with things. And you've probably heard the story about a train wreck carrying circus animals, and the gorilla got loose. And I don't know if that ever happened, but that sure was mentioned quite a bit.
So Doug, being Ohio, I mean, we've had several Native American tribes within Ohio. Is there any evidence or any reports from any of those tribes that would link to a Bigfoot sighting or anything like that?
Sure. When you talk to one of the elders, or if you can get a hold of, I think a lot of their stuff wasn't written down. It was, just handed down verbally. But some of the elders will tell you these stories, and some of them don't even want to talk about it because they think it's bad luck to discuss these things. But, I've seen pictures of totem poles, and they have a skull. It looks like a skull of an ape or a gorilla. Well, how did North American Native Americans, like back in the 1800s, where would they ever be given a chance to see a gorilla?
Right.
We didn't have zoos with gorillas in them back then, and yet here was one of the things that had been carved. And the same thing with the what's the things called that they carve in the rocks? The petroglyphs. There are petroglyphs of these things. There's carvings on trees. There was a book published years ago of story about Salt Fork, and there was I think it was a beech tree and a carving on there, and the old fella that they interviewed about this carving said that they referred to this thing as a woolly booger, and it was from the area which is now Salt Fork State Park. This was way before the park opened up.
That's really interesting. One of the things that fascinates me, and Mike, you and I talk about this a lot with UFOs. It's interesting to have a singular story, but once you start compounding multiple stories, you have a lot more corroborative evidence. And I'm curious to ask you, Doug, because we're talking about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, but we've also got like the skunk ape. We've got the Yeti, and these aren't just a North America phenomena. It's all over the world. And I'm curious, do you think this is all kind of one and the same thing, or do you think these are kind of separate phenomena?
Well, from the descriptions of these creatures, they don't all look alike, but in the United States, we've got sketches of witnesses' sightings. Sibylla Irwin has worked with numerous authors and Bigfoot researchers and done sketches. She'll talk to the witness, and some of these creatures look like they are like the Geico caveman. They look more human, and other ones look more like a gorilla or an ape. And another example is, I mentioned David Paulides. When he did his first two books before the missing 411 books, he did one called The Hoopa Project and another one called Tribal Bigfoot. And he went to the Hoopa Indian Reservation and got permission to speak with the elders, and they introduced him to a lot of these witnesses that had seen these creatures up in that area, of the state. And he took a fellow along with him named Harvey Pratt, who also had a law enforcement background. Mr. Pratt was a sketch artist, and he would sit down with the witness, and the witness would tell him what the perpetrator looked like, and he'd sketch it, and then she'd say, well, make his nose bigger and make his lips thinner and make his eyes further apart. And a very talented person. And Sibylla Irwin will do the same thing, and she'll do it. They don't even have to be together. They can call one another on the phone, and both of them fire up their computers, and she'll do the sketch, and then the witness can say, make the head smaller or make it more pointed. And she does this at no charge.
So Doug, do you think that there's probability? Is it probable that maybe a Bigfoot or a humanoid was some type of government experiment that may have got loose, and that's why the government tries so hard to suppress the information?
Well, I've heard that theory, and let's just say I have no evidence supporting that, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that has been, tried by them.
I think it's an interesting conversation. Like Bigfoot, from a human evolution standpoint, we've got the famous kind of human evolution point Lucy, which is loosely kind of very, very similar to Bigfoot. But we're talking so far in the past. It's just like how could that have remained out in the open for so long and not be found? Doug, one thing, and I want to pivot a little bit because I think this is interesting. I'm more of the UFO guy. It is what it is. One of the things that I find fascinating is that there seems to be corroborative evidence between UFO sightings and then sightings of Bigfoots. And I'm just curious to kind of get your take on that, and if you see kind of any truth to that in the kind of the information that you've collected.
Yeah, I would have to agree. When I started my Bigfoot research and started reading everything I could get my hands on about Bigfoot, I would get, sometimes I'd get upset when they would have a chapter in the Bigfoot book about UFOs. And I would say, well, what are you writing about Bigfoot or UFOs in a Bigfoot book? Convince me that Bigfoot is real, and we'll leave the other entity for another time. And I didn't stop reading the book, but it kind of put a sour taste in my mouth. This supposedly Bigfoot researcher or witness, and he's trying to convince me that these hairy 8-foot creatures are real. Now he's talking about flying saucers and little green men. Well, I kept finding books, Bigfoot books, and I couldn't even tell you how many I've read now. I've got a list, and it's well over 200 books. And, that certainly doesn't make me or anyone else an expert on the subject. It's just that I've read a lot of books, and I compare, stories. Oh, I remember reading about that last year from West Virginia or something. But there seems to be some correlation between the two. And a lot of the other Bigfoot researchers and authors that I've spoken with were kind of the same way. They didn't really want to buy into the flying saucer thing at the same time. But when you've got a witness there that's shaking and crying and telling you what they saw, and they happen to mention, yeah, we saw lights come over the hill and something landed down in the woods, you can't ignore it. You have to, you have to believe them.
Yeah, it's part of the story.
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, just to give our viewers and listeners just kind of an idea, when we're talking like Bigfoot itself, like, can you give us like the physical, like how tall typically are the reports of like how tall a Bigfoot is, stuff like that? Just give kind of like a
physical description.
Yeah, physical description of, what a Bigfoot.
Sure. Well, from what I've been told by witnesses, most of the reports would say that it was a dark, by dark I'm talking black to dark brown, often with a reddish tinge in the coloration on the hair. Typically, they would say that there was no hair on the face, like on the cheeks or the nose. The palms of the hands didn't contain any hair, but the skin was dark on the hands and the face. And then the hair length, sometimes they'd say 4 inches, sometimes it had like long tassels under its arms. And that, like the hair was hanging down like remember the thing in Predator?
Oh,
or
yeah.
like dreadlock. Colors go from black, brown, reddish tint to salt and pepper, kind of a grayish, to actually white ones. There have been people, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say, yeah, I saw a white one and the eyes were pink, which would tell me, well, we're talking about albino. I don't recall hearing pink eyes. You hear red eye shine a lot, and sometimes green and amber. Size-wise, typically it's in that 7 to 8 foot range. Other times it's smaller, 3, 4, 5 feet. I've heard of like a mother carrying a young one. And then I've heard the other end of the extreme, 9, 10, 11 feet, even taller. And I'm kind of squeamish about saying, well, the guy reported seeing a 14-foot Bigfoot. And, I used to kind of shake my head, but you do get that odd report every now and then where they say it was over 12 feet tall. It was, because its head was right at, even with this branch on this tree. And we went back later on in the daytime and we measured the tree, and, the tree was 12 feet off the ground, 12 feet high, the tree limb. So, and some people, honestly, we've gone to libraries and given talks, and there were actually people there that raised their hand and they said, well, how is it seen in Florida on the 3rd of June, and then on the 5th of June they saw it in Washington State? Did it take an airplane? And, you have to say, well, there are more than one of these creatures. There's a breeding population.
So Doug,
I thought there was just one. I said, no, I don't know how many thousand, probably.
So Doug, I want to ask you that question. I had this kind of on my list of things that I was curious about. From a biological standpoint, in order to have a breeding population, there's some calculations you can do about how big of a group you need to have and what the food source would need to be to sustain that. So I'm just curious to get your take. I mean, based on the amount of research you've done, how many Bigfoot do you think exists within the state of Ohio?
Boy, that's really hard to say. I just have to guess, and because a lot of the reports, especially ones coming out of the same area, you would think are different people seeing the same creature. And one easy way to track that is look at if there are any footprints, and you've taken pictures and measurements, and say it's 15 inches long and it's 7.5 inches wide, and somebody else finds a very similar sized track and it was a mile away, that would tell me it's very possible that was the same creature.
That makes sense, like a thumbprint.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never personally seen a track that anybody got from around here that had dermal ridges in it.
Okay.
But, out west in some of the finer soil, that's more sandy, or that would show up more than what it would here.
So I guess we can't even really say what their food source really even is. I mean, if we've never...
That's a good question, Doug.
Really?
I mean, do you have anything on... I mean, whether they're herbivores, carnivores, is there any kind of information or even, theories out there on that?
Well, just from what I've read and been able to learn on my own from talking to witnesses, they're omnivorous. They'll eat meat, they'll eat plants. They've been known to dumpster dive. They've been known to eat dead animals off the road. They will happily come into your garden and take whatever they want, and sometimes leave huge tracks. And that reminds me of a story. I've got a friend who's a researcher, and he's been doing this a long, long time, probably 50 years or so. And he went out to John Green's home and stayed with him a few days way back in I don't know if this would have been the 70s or 80s. And John Green was telling him a story about, remember the family, and I can't remember their name. I think they might have lived in Idaho, but the man was away in town working or something, or out in the woods or wherever. And the wife was there by herself with the children. And one of these Sasquatch creatures came walking down out of the mountains, and the kids ran in the house and told their mother that this thing was out there. And she was part Indian, and she believed that if you looked at one of these things, or if it saw you, that you could change into one of them, or some kind of a horrible accident.
Like a skinwalker.
Yeah, so she held up a blanket and had her kids get on the other side of it, and she hustled them down to they had a river or a creek or something near their house, and she got the kids out of there, and they walked all the way to town. And I don't know how long later on the father found out, or he came home, and there were these Bigfoot tracks all over the place, and his family was missing, and he panicked and thought that some kind of a creature got them. Well, they found out that the family was safe and everything, but the creature had kind of vandalized the property. It went into one of the sheds, and I think it knocked over some kegs that had salted fish or whatever. And I can't remember the name of these people, but it's a well-known story. It's in some of my older books. But one thing I wanted to say was, the Bigfoot walked into the garden, and it was so heavy it sunk down in, and it actually crushed the potatoes that were still growing in the garden.
Wow, that's a lot of weight.
Mm-hmm.
And this friend of mine, his name's Chuck, he said John Green told him that right there, convinced him that these things are real. Because, how are you going to fabricate that, put a crushed tomato in the ground, and then put the disturbed soil on top of it with the track, just like that, to try to hoax it. And he said, no, that was real.
That's really...
So I think they'll eat whatever they want, and if they don't like it, they won't eat it.
So Doug, I've got to ask this question. So Brian and we've talked about it, this in kind of in length, and we both kind of feel the same way, but there's numerous shows on TV, and I'm not going to throw a specific show out, that go out and they're hunting Bigfoot and they're trying to find Bigfoot. Like, what are your thoughts on those shows? Are they helping or hurting the Bigfoot community? Like those who've had experiences or believe in Bigfoot themselves? Yeah.
Well, it's pretty hokey and pretty corny, a lot of it, but it has gotten the name out there. But I think it's also it's kind kind of helped out some of these hoaxers, because, well, I know one year down at the Mothman Festival, there's a program on, and I'll not give the name as well, and it's more, one of the kids love this program, and I don't know if it's even still on. And there were more than one character, more than one star of the program, and these fellows would go around to festivals and stuff, and they would, I don't know whether they would sell, they probably got some kind of reimbursement for their travel expenses, but kids would line up. There'd be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids, mostly, lined up to go in and meet these guys and get a picture taken with them. And maybe, I don't know that they had written any books, but maybe they'd autograph a picture.
I can almost guarantee who you're thinking of is who I'm thinking of.
Yeah. And it's a wonder they never shot and killed one another, because they'd all carry weapons.
Oh yeah, that's definitely the same show. I told Mike always wants to watch this show, and I'm like, I just don't like it because it puts a bad taste in my mouth for the people that really do experience something. And it's like you've talked about, Doug, like the people that have the arm, their arm hair stand up and they're, viscerally terrified, that I feel like it's a discredit to them and to what.
So let's rephrase that. Mike doesn't always want to watch this. Tyler.
Oh yeah, we'll throw him.
We're going to throw Tyler on the bus. He's the one who wants us to watch this all the time. And to be honest with you, like, we've tried. We made it like 3 minutes into one of the shows, and it was just so corny. And that's and Doug, that's the one thing that I talk about a lot on our podcast, and Brian just kind of mentioned it, is what gets under my skin is that there are real people out there who've had real experiences, whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, other cryptids, whatever. And you have people that make a mockery of this subject, and in my mind, it prevents those people from coming forward and giving us their stories and giving, telling us what they experienced, because they don't want to be labeled, and these shows do not do us any favors.
Right. Yeah.
And I know I've had people tell me that they don't believe in Bigfoot because, they saw a program or a documentary or whatever, and so they went to their computer and went on Google or one of the search engines, and they typed in Bigfoot, and they're looking at videos, and they see one that says Bigfoot caught on tape, and I thought, oh, that's what I want to look at, and they hit, okay, and this video comes on, a guy with his sock and shoe off, and there's his bare foot, and he's got packing tape stuck to it, and it's hanging off of it, and that's Bigfoot caught on tape.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take too many of those before the researcher shuts the thing off and said, that's just what I thought. It's a bunch of BS.
Right.
Somebody's trying to make money or be famous off of it. And I know what it's all about now, and I'm done with it. And it's also hard to go through and undo what somebody has done when that happens.
That's a really good point.
A very
good point. So, Doug, I want to ask, you've been doing this so long, like, what do you think are kind of the big next steps in Bigfoot research? And is there any kind of new technologies or methods out there that kind of has you excited?
Well, there's always new stuff coming out, better cameras and drones. I'm surprised they really haven't got more than what they have, with drones, because you can flood an area with drones. And the thing is, there are so many hoaxers out there that if somebody was to come up with really good photographic evidence, and they would bring that forward, the first thing people would say, oh, that's artificial intelligence or computer generated.
Right.
And I certainly wouldn't know how to tell the difference. I have to listen to the witness and read their body language to see if they're telling me the truth or they're trying to pull a fast one.
Yeah.
So Doug, when you say you receive a video or a photo, and the person who experienced it seems credible, do you have somebody in your, with the Ohio Society of Bigfoot investigations, do you have someone who can like review that video and just and decide if it's AI or it's been manipulated in any way?
I'll try to, pass it around to other researchers, let them have a crack at it, and we'll also vet the person that come up with this video. And, guys like Steve Calls, I've spoken with Steve a number of times, and spoken at some conventions and conferences along with him. And, he's a pretty good detective, and he can pretty much sniff out something that's fake. And there's, I've told people, I'm not going to mention any names again, but there's some YouTube channels out there and Facebook pages, and people have said, oh, we love to listen to that guy. He's seen this and he's seen that. And I said, have you ever talked to Steve Calls or looked on his Facebook page or YouTube channel? Because this guy that you're talking about has some really shady background things you want to be cautious of before you swallow everything that he's putting out there.
Yeah, that's probably words of wisdom. Doug, I guess, for the folks out there that you're kind of talking about with the folks that are watching YouTube videos and or even for the folks that are, listening to this podcast too, is there anything that kind of your everyday person can do to help contribute to Bigfoot research or, the search for evidence?
Well, I would recommend, it's very easy to get on the computer and jump from pictures and videos and reading stories and this and that. But, I'm old school and I like books. I tend to believe something that's in a book where the author has taken the time to gather the information and actually have the story published. I tend to believe that more so than somebody just putting a video out there. If you know how to do that, that is a lot easier and faster and less expensive than getting a book published.
Yeah, that's a pretty good. Doug, I guess we didn't talk about it earlier, but I am kind of curious because it was the first thing that I saw that just drew me to the Bigfoot field in general. What's your take on the Patterson film? I know it's been hotly debated for so long now, but I mean, what's your theory on it?
I've always believed that it's real. I've talked to, well, of course, Roger Patterson has passed away, but Bob Gimlin, I've talked to him a couple of times at Salt Fork, and I have to believe that it's real. I know there was, I remember when I first started going to meetings about the subject, and they had stories about the Patterson Gimlin film, and I remember reading, there was a fellow, and I'm not going to give his name either, that claimed he was wearing the suit that they videoed, and it wasn't a living creature, it was a man in a suit. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, then let's see the suit. We'll give you $25,000 or whatever the figure was, and he could not produce this suit. Why is that? And then they went to, I believe it was Walt Disney Studios, and showed them the film, and they said, what do you think? And the Walt Disney Studios said, well, that's what we want to know. How did you come up with this? I said, well, we didn't. And they said, well, we don't have the capability of making a suit like that. This shows muscle movement, under the skin and the hair. And we certainly don't have anything at that time. Now, they may now be able to duplicate that, but they didn't back in 1967.
Right. Well, you're typically always going to have that one person that just wants a piece of the pie, right?
Attention
seeking, money grab or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen the video, and I mean, I remember watching it as a kid. I mean, just make the hair on your
Yeah.
skin stand. Because, like I say, I
Yeah.
grew up hunting and fishing, especially like in streams and in the woods. And I'll tell you what, man, it made me
That
question
would be something that would freak you out if you saw that for sure.
walking out in the woods at 0 dark 30 to go set up in a tree stand after you just watched a video like that. Yeah, man.
Now, Doug, you've had so much time to research and talk to all these peoples. And I know it was interesting because it was one of my questions I wanted to ask if you'd had personal experiences, and you've not seen it, but you kind of talked about you'd seen broken trees and heard some of the yells and seen footprints and some of that stuff. But if it actually happened and you came face to face with one of these creatures, how do you think you'd react?
Well, it would depend on the circumstances. One, would I be a little bit safer in the confines of my automobile, my car, or my truck driving down the road and the thing's 100 yards out in front of me? That, if I had my choice to have a sighting, that would be fine. I don't want one of those where it's 2:30 in the morning and you're hiking a trail out in the woods and you're going down this path and there's absolutely no noise whatsoever, no crickets, no katydids, no whippoorwills, nothing. And you turn the corner and there it is right there 3 feet in front of you staring at you, and the truck's a half mile away. I don't really want to have that sighting.
F that.
I was, my wife and I were just on vacation in Asheville, and we were hiking, and it was a very remote area and some trails in a county that we maybe shouldn't have been hiking at that time. And it was very odd because before we heard and then saw the bear, it was completely quiet in the woods. Like there was absolutely no sound. And it just made me think like, oh, there is an apex predator around here and everyone's out except for us who are too dumb to know better. Right?
Dum-dums.
No, I hear you. So, Doug, I guess, you have any upcoming kind of projects or research endeavors that you'd kind of like to tell our viewers and listeners about?
Well, we have one more library talk coming up, I believe Thursday, down in Ironton, and then that will finish us up for this year. I am taking stories. At this point in time, it looks like I will be doing a 7th book, and I'm still, collecting stories and doing interviews and stuff. I haven't actually started writing anything yet, but we just had an event in Coshocton County, and I got, I think, four different people filled out one of those forms, with their name and phone number, and told me it would be all right to call them and get their story. So I'm anxious to hear what they have to say. Other than that, some of the places that we spoke at this year said they'd like to have us come back next year. I'm getting a lot of miles on this old carcass, and I'm wanting to kind of slow down and take it a little bit easier. I'm not able to get out in the woods and navigate some of these hills and hollers that we have down here in southeastern Ohio.
Sure.
So I have to pass a lot of those things off onto the younger guys. But if it's still someplace that's not too hard to walk, I'll try to get out there myself and take a look.
So Doug, Brian and I were thinking next year we were going to go to, it's the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, right? Is that what it was called, Brian? Ohio Bigfoot. Does that sound right, Doug? The Ohio Bigfoot Conference?
Yeah, it's the one Mark DeWorth runs, and it'll be the first weekend in May.
Yeah, that's it. Will you be at that?
I will have a vendor's table, so
right.
I will be there.
Well, Brian and I think we're going to go.
Yeah, we were talking about doing a live podcast. We have enough viewers and subscribers. We thought we might do that at some point. We think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, we haven't really reached out to anybody about that, but it would be cool.
Flushed out the details.
Yeah, but it's one of those things that is on our list of, I guess, our wish list.
If you want to listen to the speakers, you want to make sure as soon as the tickets go on sale, you immediately try to get a ticket, because they always sell out very, very quickly. Now you can, even if you don't have a ticket, you can go and walk through the vendors area and talk to all the vendors And most of the time the speakers are given a vendor's table, and when they're not actually up on stage talking, they're at their vendor's table. So you can go and talk to, whether it was Cliff or Bobo or Renee or whoever the speaker, Dr. Meldrum, whoever it is, you'll have an opportunity to speak with him, and maybe buy a book or get an autograph or something. But there'll be hundreds and hundreds of other enthusiasts around you at that time.
That's pretty cool.
Cool.
So Doug, where can our viewers and listeners go to find your books right now for sale? I know I've seen some on Amazon. Are there other places they can go to locate those?
Yeah, I've got. I'm trying to get them established at different stores and venues, and I've got a real good following down in Hocking County. I've got 4 or 5 accounts down there, and they just sell the snot out of these books. They have Bigfoot T-shirts, and dolls, and coffee cups. And I walked in and I said, "Do you sell a lot of Bigfoot stuff?" And they said, "Oh yeah, people drive from hundreds of miles away to come down here because of the Bigfoot stories." And I said, "Well, do you sell any Bigfoot books?" And they said, "Well, no." I said, "Would you like to?" And then I show them what I have, and they said, "Oh, well, I know we could sell these because I have a lot of them from that area." And I'm trying to get them established in different parts of the state.
Gotcha.
But you can get them, like you said, through Amazon, or you can get them right from me. I've got a personal Facebook page, and then our SOSBI, the Southeastern Ohio Society for Bigfoot Investigations. That's the group that I helped to create. Either one of those groups, you can get information on ordering books.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, for anybody interested out there, there's your path in. And I guess, Doug, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least end with, like, if you could leave our listeners with one key takeaway about Bigfoot, what would it be?
Keep an open mind. Don't do like I did when I first started. And I'd go out in the woods and I'd pretty much stay on the trail and be staring down at the ground all the time looking for tracks. Look up too, because they can climb trees, they can hide behind trees. If you're videoing, I kind of like what was the fellow's name that passed away? I think he was from I want to say, was it Tennessee or Kentucky? He would video and he'd aim the video camera backwards, so he would catch anything when he walked down the trail in the woods. If the creature was hiding behind a tree until he got past, then it would stick its head out. He'd catch it on video.
It's interesting, like stalking him.
So
yeah.
So Doug, if Brian and I wanted to go out for Bigfoot, would there be anybody that you would recommend us going with? Would it be someone from your group? Like, if we wanted to go out and try to capture, obviously it would be great for podcasts, great for, for our viewers to be able to kind of go out and see what an investigation even looks like. Is that something that, your group would be able to do?
Yeah, possibly. When years ago when I first got into this, we would go out and knock on trees with ball bats and do yells and whoops and stuff. And I'm kind of beyond that now, to where I would rather just, I do take the parabolic with me, but go out and sit and listen. And first thing you want to do is go to an area that has had activity. It's like, I used to fish quite a bit, and people say, "Well, I want to go get a great big bass put on the wall." Well, study where they've been caught. Don't go to an area that produces very few big fish. Go to one that does produce them, because you'll up your chances. But read as much as you can, find out about them. They really don't have weaknesses, unless you might say, well, they have that curiosity factor. If you're brave enough, go find some lonely campground. We're coming up toward the end of the year, the end of the camping. I've had a number of reports about people that camped in the off season, and they were the only ones in the campground, maybe clear at the back end of the campground. They're curious about kids. Take some kids and let them, laugh and chatter, and get the creature's attention, and maybe you'll catch something looking in the window.
Can you imagine that? Going over like
Use
collecting all your neighbor kids and like, hey, I got something for you to do tonight. Like,
yeah, use your kids' bait. You could tie a leash around their neck and it's scary, yank them back in.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, we're gonna step away from that one.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, Doug. Well, we truly appreciate you being on this evening. What a great topic, conversation.
Thank you so much for taking the time. That was really good. It was informative. I know our viewers and listeners are going to love this one.
Oh, absolutely. And again, if you want to read some of Doug's books, obviously they're on Amazon.
His personal Facebook page, the Sasquatch website, and we can throw up links to that on our social media too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It's been great talking with you guys. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Good.
It was.
We enjoyed having you on.
Absolutely. So, to all our viewers and our listeners, you can find us on Instagram, Otherworldly Encounter Podcast. You can find us at Otherworldly Encounters 2024 at gmail.com if you want to contact us. If you have any questions about today's episode, feel free to write in. You can DM us. You can, send us an email. If there's anything that you would like us to ask Doug that we didn't ask during this episode, we'll compile a list and we'll get it to Doug, and maybe we'll have him on again if he's up for it, and we'll ask him some questions.
Yeah, please comment, like, and subscribe. We love hearing all the feedback, good, positive, in between.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, until the next time, keep your mind open and your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.